Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Read a Game of Thrones. My name is Riakeem and today we're going to be talking about Chapter 8, which is the second Bran viewpoint chapter. Let's get into it. Alright, just a little bit of overview of my series. There are spoilers in this video, particularly for this chapter, but sometimes I do spill ahead, but I really try to limit it to the chapter that we are discussing. I do the reading off camera and I do commentary and analyses on camera. This chapter again is the second Bran viewpoint chapter, which is chapter 8 in the book, and you can see the description below for more of the book details. Soon I will take the time to learn how to add video links and update my social media accounts, so please like, comment, and subscribe to me on those places. Links at the end of the video. Alright, so this video is going to be a little bit different from the other videos. I'm still going to be talking about the who, what, when, and where, and why. But instead of breaking it down character by character, in certain topics, I'm going to be spending this entire video talking about the character Bran. So the who is Bran. We also see Jaime Lannister and Cersei Baratheon Lannister later on at the end of the chapter. The what is Bran has to say goodbye. He has to say goodbye to the people that he loves, and he also has to say goodbye to his home in Winterfell because he has to go south to King's Landing with his father Ned. The when is sometime after the past events of chapters 1 through 7, including the prologue. So we know this because some days had passed and people know things that they didn't know before. So the last we know of Jon and him joining the Night's Watch is that Ned is going to have a conversation with him, but it appears that that has already happened, as Bran is he knows it, and Jon is going to join. And we also know that Ned has already told the king that he has accepted the position of Hand of the King. So all of that happened off screen, and we are moving forward with the story, where it's Winterfell, well, above it, and it ends at the Old Tower. Why? Because Bran has to learn more. We have to learn more about Bran, and we dive more into his coming of age as a character, especially as a viewpoint character. It's very important that characters have to grow and change in order to be different by the end of the story than they begin. And for Bran to be a viewpoint character, he's obviously of importance. So we also get a spike in tension between the Starks and the Lannisters, which not only spikes the tension between the families, but a spike in tension of the story because of how the chapter ends with Bran falling off of the tower, or being pushed off the tower. Alright, so doing a quick analysis of Bran, he's a character who needs to come of age. If you're familiar with the coming of age trope, it's basically when a young, naive character has to learn a life lesson and mature throughout the course of the story. And Bran, as a character, he's only 7, so he's very young, and he has a literal coming of age to do as we see him progress from childhood to adulthood. But he also has a lot of life lessons to learn in the first chapter, in the first viewpoint chapter the first Bran viewpoint chapter. We see him going to the beheading, and he has to sort of be a man at the beheading. He can't look away, or father will notice, if you will. So in this chapter we see that coming of age progression a little bit more. He discusses the promotion of pony to horse. As a child he has to ride a pony, but now he's old enough to ride a horse, and he's going south to live in the red castle, the red walls of the King's Landing. So that pony to horse sort of mirrors his progression from childhood to adulthood, even at the age of 7. And we already know that in this world, you don't necessarily become an adult when you are 18, but a little bit younger than that. We see Daenerys, who is engaged, and she's only like 13, 14, or 15. We see Robb and Jon in positions of leadership only at the age of 14. So obviously the age of adulthood is a little bit younger in terms of the progression, but Bran being 7 is about to cross that threshold, if you will. He is also a naive character. In the end of the chapter, when he sees Jaime Lannister and Cersei Baratheon having sex, he doesn't really know what's going on. He describes it as Jaime is hurting her. So he must also leave home. If Bran is to be one of the heroes of the story, one significant point in every hero's adventure is they must leave the ordinary world. Every hero this has to happen to. Luke Skywalker has to leave his ordinary world and go on this big adventure. Frodo Baggins has to leave Hobbiton in the Shire and take the One Ring into Mordor. Every hero needs to leave the world they know to go into the unknown, and that's sort of what is about to happen for Bran. We also get, through Bran's point of view, a bunch of motley backstory characters that are listed here. An important part of the chapter is that Bran has to say his goodbyes. He does not get to go on the hunt with the other men because he has to get ready for travel. Robert, Robb, Joffrey, Benjen, Theon, Roderick, all the men, if you will, who don't really have traveling to do, they all go hunting, and Bran is sort of left behind with his sisters and the baby, Rickon, if you will. So we know that he has to leave his home tomorrow, which is symbolic for that, first step in a hero's journey and a first step in coming of age. He must leave his physical home, but also, if you consider his home a metaphorical place, he must leave his comfort zone. And that's the only way that change happens, is when characters are taken out of their own comfort zone and enter into a world unknown. When Bran goes south, he will have to leave home, and so this chapter is a goodbye to Winterfell for Bran. As much as any other character, he's saying goodbye to Winterfell, and we really see that Bran, more so than any other character, has such a familiarity with Winterfell and such a different point of view from what the other characters have, because he gets so high when he climbs the walls. He's interacting with nature, the birds that live atop the castle keeps, and he's looking down on people who aren't necessarily looking back up at him. So it's something that is a very unique perspective from him, and this is sort of his last, something that he loves to do. He's going to be leaving it. He knows the place so well. It just goes to show that this is somewhere where he is really comfortable. He knows the inner workings of the walls, he describes, but he has to leave it all behind to sort of begin the adventure. Alright, so Bran as a character is a dreamer. For starters, I'm going to put some information about the Kingsguard on the right that you learn from the chapter without going too much into detail about it. But through Bran's point of view, we see this over fantastical look of the Kingsguard. Really, they probably are just characters who guard the king, right? So they're probably just really good swordsmen who the king will trust. But Bran, as a character, he wants to become a knight and join the Kingsguard. And also, considering his age, we have to acknowledge the fact that he might be over fantasizing, right? He sees swords and fighting dragons and going on quests and being a hero. I think that's kind of what he sees the Kingsguard is, and if you consider that as an opposite view of what Ned has to deal with, he doesn't necessarily want the responsibility of having to work for the king, and being a guard of the king probably is more boring than 7-year-old Bran has fantasized it to be. He sees the armor, he sees the flashing lights, if you will, but we really don't know much more about the position, except for they all have these great names, and Old Not has told him stories of them, but we don't really know much else outside of the fantasy that he holds them in regards to. He also is characterized as a dreamer based on his interactions with the natural world, especially Winterfell. One of the quotes from the text says, "The heart tree had always frightened him. Trees ought not have eyes," Bran thought, "or leaves that looked like hands." So as a 7-year-old, you can imagine, like, when you see those movies where kids go down into the basement and the not dishwasher in the basement, shit, and the clothes washer, the laundry machines, they come to life, because that's something that kids tend to fantasize. They tend to make inanimate objects sentient and be afraid of them, but we already know that the trees have sort of a life to them, but for Bran to sort of fantasize that, he's sort of almost afraid of them, unlike other characters like Catelyn Stark and Ned Stark, who aren't necessarily afraid of them, but they put that same sort of sentient placement on them. So Bran is definitely a dreamer with a wild imagination, as we see him in this chapter. So we learn that Bran is an amazing climber. The rooftops of Winterfell were Bran's second home. We learned that he could climb before he could walk. allegedly. But what this does is it allows us a different perspective from all the other characters in terms of how Bran sees the world. His mother was terrified that one day Bran would slip off a wall and kill himself, which, if you read the chapter, you see at the end of the chapter where he is pushed off the tower by Jaime Lannister, that, you know, that could have been setting him up. Who's going to, you know, who's going to believe that Jaime pushed him? Everyone is going to think that he has fallen off the tower, unless he's able to, you know, come back to and tell them, but we don't really know what's going to happen at this point. It ends with him falling and meeting the ground. He liked how it felt too, pulling himself up a stone by stone, fingers and toes digging hard into the small surfaces between. He always took off his boots and went barefoot when he climbed. It made him feel as if he had 4 hands instead of 2. So we know that Bran likes animals, and that could become important later on when we learn what we inevitably learn about Bran. So this is an important thing to pay attention to early on. It's funny that we learn a little bit more about the Godswood. So it's funny that they use it as a place for punishment. He's sent here when he gets caught climbing and he's not supposed to. So it's funny that they use this sort of religious place, this place of quiet, sedentary worship, to reflect and to not to punish, but to make him go there and reflect. So it's sort of training him early to use this place as a place of reflection. It's funny too because he has Ned's approval to climb. You know, oftentimes we see fathers approve of their kids doing things that they're not necessarily supposed to behind the mother's back, right? It's just Ned, you know, encouraging him to, you know, be a little boy, if you will. He's gonna climb, let him climb. My son's a squirrel. But we also see some images of his past, a little bit more comfort from his home. So he has fun when the guards chase him, even though he's getting into trouble. It just sort of makes us feel warm as readers before we get to the end of the chapter, and our guard has been sufficiently let down, and then we are just taken along for the ride. So people never looked up. That was another thing he liked about climbing. It was almost like being invisible. So we notice that he sort of talks about wanting to be invisible through this thought. A funny thing is, if you play video games in it, he almost is developing to be a little assassin, right? I couldn't stop thinking of Assassin's Creed when reading this chapter. He's climbing on walls, he's above people where they can't see him, he almost feels invisible, and he's watching people, he's learning things, he knows the inner workings of the city. He is kind of a little ninja the way he can climb around the city and that sort of thing. So then we also learn that his favorite haunt is the Broken Tower. His favorite place to go and sit, if you will, is the Broken Tower. Once it had been a watchtower, the tallest in Winterfell. A long time ago, 100 years before even his father had been born, a lightning strike had set it afire. So we learn a little bit more about the history of Westeros, the history of Winterfell. So, after Bran has been, he tries to say his goodbyes, but he ends up not having the strength enough to do that. He climbs the walls of the city and he's going to the tower where no one else ever goes. He gets there and he hears 2 people talking. In the conversation they're having is about the king and the hand of the king. They do not like the fact that Eddard Stark is going to be the new hand of the king. They even say, the characters who are talking even say they didn't expect that Ned would agree to become hand of the king. But of course his honor and duty would suggest nothing less. We learn through the conversation of these 2 characters, who at this point are a mystery to the reader, but we over time learn that they are that the 2 characters are Cersei Lannister and Cersei Baratheon and Jaime Lannister. But through their conversation we learn that Robert has 2 brothers, Stannis Baratheon. Stannis would be enough to give anyone indigestion, says, I believe it was Jaime who says this. And we also learn that he has another brother, Renly. Finally we're getting some more information about the Baratheons, right? We learn that there's a character named Littlefinger who could have been named Hand of the King. Give me honorable enemies rather than ambitious ones, and I'll sleep more easily by night. So Littlefinger, from what we do know about him, is an ambitious character who maybe is void or lacking in honor, based on this one line alone from what Jaime says. We learn a little bit more about the death of Jon Arryn via the conversation that they have about Lysa or Lisa Aaron. If she knew anything, she would have gone to Robert before she fled King's Landing. So that means there was something to be known. So we get a little bit more information that maybe Young Aaron was assassinated somehow. Mothers, I think birthing does something to your minds. You are all mad. Queen Cersei and Sir Jaime. He's still in love with the sister, the insipid little dead 16-year-old. How long till he decides to put me aside for some new Lyanna? Cersei says to Jaime. But still he recognized the queen. That's what happens. That's Bran recognizes the queen. Bran thinks that thought after he sees her in the tower. Now this is the moment when they catch him, and then we have the scene where Jaime pushes poor Bran, poor little 7-year-old Bran, pushes him from the tower, and he falls, maybe to his death, maybe not to his death. We don't know yet. At the end of the chapter, he has just fallen. But one of the things that this chapter does to show us is that Jaime and Cersei are having an affair. They are doing it. They are having an incestuous, is that the right word for that? Incestuous relationship where they are brother and sister. So they're pulling straight up Targaryen right now. And of course, the king cannot know about this, and that is why Jaime has to push Bran from the tower in order to save the sanctity of this little secret that they have going on. They're in a tower that no one goes to, so obviously they're doing something wrong, right? Because they're hiding, so they push him from the tower, and it's very sad to see them push poor little Bran from the tower. But we also learn, we have it in hard writing that, at least from Cersei's point of view, that she does not like that Robert is still in love with Lyanna. She even refers to Lyanna as that dead little 16-year-old. Rude. But yeah, so we learn a little bit more about that situation. So thanks again for watching my videos. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I tried to go through this video really quickly this time. I'm a little under the weather. Hopefully you couldn't really hear that in my voice, but you probably could hear the congestion. But follow me on Facebook, like me on Facebook, subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter, and check out my Goodreads account. And I promise eventually I'm going to hyperlink these videos. If you're watching this in 2017, then they're probably already hyperlinked and you're like, what is this guy talking about? But if not, then right now it's probably just like the pictures. But all the information should be available in the description soon, if not already. I really appreciate everyone who's watching. Thanks. Stay tuned after the little trailer, if you will, for a little bit more information about the chapter. Alright, so if you're still here, here's a little post-credit scene for you. The Dire Wolves of Winterfell. Something else that we learn in this chapter, we learn a little bit more about each of the Dire Wolves' names. So I just want to go through this quickly so you can have a little bit more information about the names of the Dire Wolves. We have Robb, who named his Dire Wolf Greywind because he ran so fast. We know that Sansa named her direwolf Lady, and that Arya named her direwolf Nymeria. It's a very interesting scene when Bran tries to remember Nymeria's name, but he can't, and he just remembers it as being named after some old witch queen. We know that Rickon, who is the youngest, names his Shaggy Dog, which is kind of cute. You expect a 3-year-old to name a direwolf Shaggy Dog instead of something brand like Brick Builder or something like that. It's pretty funny. Brick Builder is not a brand name, not a grand name. What was I talking about? And we also know that Jon named his direwolf Ghost, and that Bran wishes that he could have named his direwolf Ghost. He wished he thought of it first, even though his direwolf is gray. And finally, we don't know Bran's direwolf's name by the end of the chapter. We do learn later, the spoiler alert, of course, is that his name is Summer, but at the end of the chapter, we don't know that his name is Summer. He still is the only character who has yet to name his dire wolf. And those are the 6 dire wolves of Winterfell and the Stocks.